of the video might be used on the online site.
Okay.
But what I'm going to do is, I was only told recently that I'd have a one-on-one. So I'm gonna run this interview for a Take My Advice club. Right?
Oh, okay.
So if you can, I mean, just keep it in the back of your mind. I'm trying to get you to give us some advice.
Oh, what? I just had a lot of that downstairs. Nobody listened to a word I said. You see the pressure I feel? This is what I'm talking about.
Okay,
now I'm going to say something that doesn't depress parents or something.
Yeah, okay, so with some real life applications, some of the stuff obviously won't, like your comic book, being when you grew up, that aspect. So that doesn't really have that much real life application, but the instructions I've been given from Men's Health is more of an advice piece from you.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to start off by...
Tell me I have no spinach in my tea.
No, you don't.
Nothing.
We just did a good spinach pasta.
You've managed to get your message across despite language and cultural barriers. You know, you've made a Polish language film, Desert and the Wilderness.
Yeah.
And I actually watched rendition over the weekend.
Right.
Also a couple of languages there.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy that sort of thing? Do you enjoy a sort of cultural challenge of sort of other languages? Would you find that it's difficult to?
Well, it's a very interesting question. I mean, I think that one of the things that's so great about cinema is that more than anything, it's about looking, right into an actor's eyes and trying to get the emotions that they are feeling that lie underneath lines. So for me, what's always more interesting than the line is what the line's floating on. Most of the way people respond to us is not so much as what we say, but how it's said.
Yeah.
Our tone of voice, our body language. You can say the same line. You can say, "Hello, how are you?" Or you can say, "Hello, how are you?" And it means a completely different thing. That's just a silly example of why the specific line or the language that the line is not as interesting to me as what's going on emotionally within that person. Why? Because the language of emotion is universal. The languages are different, but human emotions are, for the most part, pretty similar all over the world. We feel jealousy, we feel love, we feel rage, and those are profoundly human emotions and have nothing to do with whether the language is Polish, Tsotsitaal, Afrikaans, English. That's just the way that emotion is spoken.
Okay. Was the young Gavin Hood very much into comics?
No. No, the young Gavin Hood was actually not allowed to read comics. And I say that with great love to my mom, who was an English teacher when I was at school. Started out as an actress, an English teacher, a history teacher, a French teacher. So, but mum and dad did, raise me around theatre, and so I was always influenced by theatre. And of course, mum being a history teacher and an English teacher, I was also raised in Greek mythology and Shakespearean plays, and of course the Greek mythology. Mum and I have joked about it now. Those ancient Greek myths are really myths about the first superheroes.
Yeah.
So Zeus with his lightning bolts and Poseidon conjuring up storms. What are they? And it's part of the way I approached Wolverine. What is Wolverine? Is he a guy with claws? Or is he someone with profoundly human emotions that happens in a mythic way to get claws because of this massive rage that then mythically, operatically becomes an extension in the form of claws? And the great thing about those Greek myths was that what made them so exciting for audiences was two things. One, they were larger than life, they were superheroes, but two, and more importantly, their disputes were profoundly human. They had issues with their lovers and their brothers and their wives and their sons, and so you're getting very, very human stories told in a kind of exciting operatic way. And I think that what Wolverine is, and what Hugh Jackman represents in Wolverine, is exactly that, a modern mythical character that is driven, nevertheless, by profoundly human emotions.
So what I picked up, because I saw it on Friday, was that overlap between that incredible anger, but then which I think is fueled to some extent by the confusion, by
Exactly.
not being able to remember things.
Yeah, yeah.
Which I think comes later on as well. But when you are unsure of something, it really feels that stress and that sense of, that your anger as well. So, what do you think about? I mean, he loses memory at the end of this film, but I think
So he's not in this movie fueled by the memory loss. But I think your point is correct. It's that. One of the great things about the comic book lore of these mutants and how you become a mutant is that if you have the mutant gene and something very traumatic happens to you around puberty, that gene may manifest itself. You may mutate. Now, think about this for a second. In a human way, any one of us who suffers a trauma, whatever that event is, whether it's the loss of a loved one or coming back from a war situation or death in the family, or any significant traumatic event changes us. In other words, we mutate. We may not grow claws, but psychologically we are no longer the person today that we were yesterday because of this event. And that's what kind of happens in Wolverine. He has a traumatic experience as a young boy, and these claws become a kind of physical manifestation of the inner psychological state. His rage and his desire to lash out at the world, which many of us have felt at various times, not just when we're young, actually manifests in a mythic way, which gives it its cool factor. But really what you're telling the story of is a very traumatized child who's trying to find his way in the world, wishes to find peace, and somehow can't reconcile his inner rage and his tendency to want to lash out with his need for peace. And that
he
is...
was also tricked. He was played in the film, which I think also makes him angry. I mean, anyone...
You mean as a young person when he's...
Well, I mean, it's obviously in the movie, and I suppose people will get to see it, but the fact that his love interest...
yes, don't give that away. We're not going to... But yes, but then it
That's
doesn't...
probably only come out, because it's a magazine, it'll only come out after...
No, fair enough. I just don't want to... I just don't want to get... But your point is exactly right. I mean, that's another event that happens to him. And when it happens in his childhood, something traumatic, then something that happens to many people at some point is betrayal.
Yeah.
And up until the point of him discovering the betrayal, he has lost the reason to live based on love because he's lost his lover. His entire motivation has become revenge, which is not a very healthy motivation, but it's the only one he has. And when he finds out he's been betrayed and even that motivation is gone, that's when he's at the rock bottom.
Yeah.
So I think that, what we're trying to do in tracking this film, you and I, is say, we're going to do two things. We're going to give the audience the spectacle, the action, and all of that fantastic visual effects stuff that is a movie like Wolverine needs on a big canvas. But right in the center of it, we're going to do what is essential to any story, is give you a great character that you attach to in a human, emotional way and go on a journey with that character. Okay, he happens to be in a sort of mythic landscape, but it's still a character that you have to fall in love with. And that's where I think Hugh does such a great job. He finds all of this inner turmoil without being sort of self-pitying in any way, without being melodramatic. It just is. And I think he's done an outstanding job.
Very short question. I noticed a lily pad comic in the guy with the all sorts of lights on the top of the caravan.
Yes.
Whose idea was that?
The idea behind this guy in the caravan is simply that he's regressed into a kind of childhood zone after suffering trauma.
I just mean
But those specific details come from my production designer, my set designers, and of course we're sort of dropping little things in for people to notice. And did you notice this? Did you notice that? It's really just a reflection of the fact that we're back in that time period.
Okay, cool.
So nothing that you should take as a deep psychological reason.
No, I thought maybe it was something from your past or something.
No. The comics that I used to sneak off and read that my friend had, I never saw Wolverine, but I loved Asterix and Obelix.
Okay.
And there's a superhero. Drink the potion and wow, here we go.
Okay.
So,
which films, particularly, I want to sort of stay in your boyhood.
Yes.
When and how did the decision come to make movies? You said you were kind of involved in the drama and Shakespeare.
Yeah.
When did you decide, okay,
I'm going to make movies?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I mean, I don't remember a defining moment that I am definitely going to make movies, but I remember defining moments along the path to me finally being brave enough to do what I really wanted to do but didn't think that we were allowed to do, could do from South Africa, because it seemed like things that people from overseas did. And it was seeing, when I was 12 years old, A Lollipop, which was the first time I ever saw a South African film. First time I remember sitting in my seat going, wow, these people speak like me, they sound like me. This is a story about us and people in our country. Up until that point, the only films I'd ever seen were about people from America, people from England. And suddenly I realized, wow, that can be. And anyway, that sat with me. And I'd love to say that was the desire, I decided to be a director, but it wasn't. I got involved in drama, I did a lot of plays at school. But then when I went to university, there wasn't really much of an industry. Yeah, and so I became a lawyer. But I was doing theatre while I was studying law, and I was also doing a lot of stills photography, which was another passion I got from my dad, who to this day is a keen wildlife photographer. So I had my passion for photography and my passion for theatre, and it slowly dawned on me that I really wanted to be a filmmaker, but I was too afraid to say so because I didn't think it was really possible. And eventually, got a long story short, I went and studied film when I was 29, and I sold everything I had here and thought, okay, I'm going to commit to this. And then there were many years I thought maybe I'd made a mistake because it was really tough, and I thought maybe I should go back to law.
So when you made a decision, did you also make a geographic shift? Did you go?
Yeah, which again was almost essential for me, because in a way you're starting over, and when you're starting over, sometimes it's good to be away from the world you grew up in. The classic. I hope this doesn't sound too. The classic journey in any classic novel or film of the young person who goes is that the hero leaves the home, goes into another world, has all kinds of adventures, and then comes home. Nobody gets a particular amount of life experience by staying too close to the nest. We all go out to a certain extent into the world and become hopefully a little wiser. So I think for me it was good to get away and study somewhere else for a bit. Yeah.
Okay, I want to try and run through these quickly, although what you're saying is it's awesome.
But not really. But hurry up and ask us quick.
No, because I'm trying to get you to take my advice.
What you're saying is okay, but could you hurry up and ask us questions? Yeah.
Which films have particularly inspired you when you were young? You said
A Lollipop because of something so. I saw The Jungle Book. And that was another thing that had this wonderful combination of great characters, wonderful music. For me, it wasn't about, as I say, A Lollipop was the specific film. Otherwise, it was just a gradual decision to say, I really know I want to do this. Do I have the courage to pursue it?
What sort of style? Because I've seen Rendition, I've seen Wolverine, Tsotsi. I haven't actually seen the others. But I've noticed they look fairly different from one another. Which style would you say you gravitate towards? A gritty sort of look, a slick sort of look, an earthy sort of thing? Or is that not really part of your?
You see,
for me, you decide on that too.
I don't. For me, the most important thing is what does the story demand? Some
so you draw that out of the character.
Yeah, and when I'm talking about a character or a story, where's the story set? What is the environment? Is this environment a glossy environment, or is it a gritty environment? So I don't think you would never shoot a sort of slick Wall Street movie necessarily in a sort of handheld 16mm gritty way, in the way that you might shoot something in another world. But if I do have a love, and what maybe does come through in all my movies is that I tend to favor the 235 CinemaScope wide format. I like the depth that it gives because I can be on a close-up, I can still feel a world going on beyond. So I tend to shoot all my movies in that shape, and I like the sense of the great composition and the epic quality. So in that sense, I'm quite a classical filmmaker. I don't tend to shoot sort of close handheld 16mm stuff. But it's just you don't really decide I'm going to have this style. You discover that people like you guys tell us, oh, that's the kind of style you have. So I just shoot what feels right for what I'm doing.
This is actually a personal question from me.
I don't know. Ask your mom.
Are you a proponent of movie activism in the sense that, I watched Rendition yesterday, and it struck me as quite a political story. And then it occurred to me that Tsotsi and Wolverine have a similar sort of anti-hero ethos in the sense that they about people treated almost as terrorists if you know what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
People that are treated as say,
Outsiders
criminals
anyway,
or suspected of something worse than what they are.
Right, that's very interesting.
And I've noticed in those three movies,
I think it's very observant.
have you sort of consciously wanted to address that sort of in like an activism?
Well, I don't know that it's deliberate. Again, you find yourself doing stuff and other people tell you what your themes are.
Yeah.
But having heard these sort of thoughts about my work, I do know that one of the things that interests me is the whole discussion around whether you have characters that are good and characters that are evil, or whether your characters embody good and evil within them. So I'm much more interested in those kinds of stories. I'm much more interested in stories where we acknowledge our own capacity for evil, if you like, or doing unpleasant things, and we have to monitor that within ourselves, than I am in stories where this is the good hero fighting the bad guy. I think human beings are more complicated than that, and so if there is a parallel between Tsotsi and Wolverine, both of these characters have an inner conflict about whether they even like their own nature, and it's that struggle for their better nature to come forth that they have in common. And certainly, ironically, that's what Hugh Jackman loved about Tsotsi and why he asked me to do the movie. Because when I got this call, like, Hugh Jackman wants to talk about Wolverine, and I was like, really? Tell me now, why'd you really phone? I'm talking to my agent. And I want to thank you for firstly, that he really enjoyed Tsotsi, and that he recognized that maybe I could work with him on bringing that kind of inner struggle out. Because that's the reason you make a movie. You've got to make sure it's packaged, as we said before, with great special effects. But special effects alone won't hold an audience. What holds an audience is still that old-fashioned thing of, do we sense some affinity with a character? And that affinity is usually because most of us at times aren't sure we like ourselves. And we struggle with certain parts of our own nature. So I'm more interested in characters that are a little more conflicted. And then by extension, the grey zone in the world of how we see things politically. Let's mix it up a little and put some challenging questions to our audience. I just felt Rendition, for example, was a film that needed to be made at that time. I think it's turned out now that we see how many of these cases were cases of innocent people who were rendered. And at times, some people said, "Oh, this never happens." Oh, really?
I was actually
speak to Maher Arar and, you know.
I was actually illegally arrested myself.
Really?
Yeah, I was in jail for about an hour, and all on trumped up stuff. So when I watched it, I actually was like, wow.
And how did you feel during that hour?
Well, if I can indulge a little bit.
No, please. It's my turn to interview. It's more interesting hearing what you have to say.
I actually felt really helpless. I mean, I've actually weighed myself. I've lost weight from that brief little encounter. No, because
even though it was just 1 hour.
No, when it actually happened, in a flash, I saw myself possibly getting HIV and all that sort of thing.
Right.
And having no idea of what was going to happen in the next 48 hours. When they took my watch off and this, you feel disarmed. You actually feel completely vulnerable, and to have your freedom taken away from you, no one really experiences that, or very few people experience that to know what that feels like.
Right. And did you feel things about how might your friends and family perceive you as a result, even though you hadn't done anything?
Look, there is a lot of stigma. You mention that, and people think, well, you must have done something to deserve that or whatever. So,
well, that's what I think is so interesting, you see, because that's what's one of the things in rendition. If someone's been arrested, well, there probably is a reason. But what if there isn't, and what if it's a real mistake? So tell me more about how. Well, how you don't have to tell me what happened in that hour. Were you alone in a cell?
I asked them if I would be safe, the prison guards, and they sort of chuckled. And
they chuckled?
Yeah. And I found that really cruel. They don't really address your uncertainty. In fact, they try to make it more of a fearful experience than it would have been. And I was in there with a suspected murderer, and another guy he had a sheet over him that was sort of cut through the middle because he'd been in a car accident, and I think he'd been accused of hijacking and then drunk driving.
Yeah.
But when I met these guys, I sort of felt that I was safe. I didn't really think that they were evil. I thought that I actually felt...
The guys who were in the cell, you felt more of an affinity with them than with the
definitely.
prison.
And to be honest, I felt that, because I spoke to them, and I made a joke myself. I said, I guess everyone in here is innocent. But when I spoke to them and I heard their stories, it did actually seem that way. That because the murderer had been arrested by virtue of him being called to go to the police station, and then he was arrested. And I mean, if he really had murdered, I don't think he would have gone there.
Reached up at the police station.
And the driver said, well, it wasn't even his car. So anyway.
Right. See, now this is a very interesting interview. We should be able to continue this interview. But go ahead.
I've actually got it. I've written the thing down on my website. If you can read it, because there's a long story of. Anyway, let's go back to yours. Are you feeling the weight of expectation around this story, around Wolverine? You're feeling like a weight of.
Yeah, I mean, it's the fact of the matter is, whether I like it or not, if the movie doesn't do well, my career will not be in good shape. You don't get this opportunity to work at this level with this kind of money and this kind of effect and screw it up. So if it does well, then other options open up for me. So in every film that you make, there are expectations, and there's both the excitement of it coming out and the fear that you may have totally screwed it up, and hope like hell that you keep working, because I love doing what I do, but you really do exist job to job. Yeah.
Well, I'm not so much a Wolverine fan, but I'm very much into comics, and I've seen the movie, and I'm not the most dedicated or obsessed Wolverine fan, but it definitely did the job as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you very much.
And on our way here, someone was trying to sell us a pirated copy.
Really?
Yeah. If you come up William Nicol.
Yes.
Someone was selling pirated copies out of a plastic bag. One of them was this movie.
Yeah, it's a very distressing thing for me. I would just say, if I may, to think about it. First of all, please don't buy that pirated copy. And here's why. I know, they want to make their money. The truth is, the money that you're giving for that pirated copy is not coming back into the filmmaking industry where we make films. It's going to people who don't make anything. They're thieves. The second problem is that you're not seeing the film that I've made for you to see. It's a copy that basically got hacked from my edit bay months before we finished the film. So the problem is that the special effects aren't finished. There's temporary music in it. It's just not the finished movie. And I would urge you to just be patient and go see the movie the way it was intended for you, if not for me. You can only see a movie for the first time once. Go see it in a cinema with surround sound, finished.
But I think if you can take one positive thing out of this, is it's only the most anticipated movies that this happens to. Star Wars and The Dark Knight.
It's sort of ironic, isn't it, though? Because you'd think that the people who are so desperate to see that film want to see it in the way that it's made to be seen. What is watching a half-done, half-finished piece of work on a computer?
People tend to watch it a dozen times in the end. The most obsessed fans. They'll watch it, the pirated version, then they'll watch it on IMAX, and they'll watch it. They are not justifying it.
No. And maybe that's true. I think the danger here with the stuff at the traffic lights is there are a lot of people who maybe are not obsessed fans who think that they're getting a cool, quick deal and they're going to buy this movie cheap, and they are getting the real movie. And the truth is, they're not getting the real movie. They're getting ripped off. They're not just ripping us off, they're ripping themselves off, because they're not getting the product that we've made. They're getting something that's half-baked that someone stole and is trying to make a quick buck, and it's very upsetting. There it is.
Okay, can you tell me about the pressures of working on this movie? Not just you've made the movie now. I mean, while you're actually working on it, how you switch off, having made the movie as well, but just your advice on how to deal with those sort of pressures. The pressures of public expectation, the pressures of working with A-listers like Jackman and Liev Schreiber. How did you deal with that?
I'm not sure I can consciously explain how to. Obviously, I felt a huge amount of pressure and still feel pressure that the movie will work for the public. I wanted to work for the public, and if they enjoy it, that makes me feel good. If they don't, it makes me feel depressed. As you're working, I mean, it was very easy at one point to feel quite overwhelmed by the scale of it all, and then just come back to the place which says, you know what, I'm still just telling a story about a character that I want people to enjoy, and all of these wonderful tools that we have at our disposal must be in service of that story about that character. So I had a great time with the scale of the visual effects I was able to do. It's like saying to a painter who's been painting on a small thing here, here's a big canvas, you want to throw paint at that? I mean, who wouldn't? You've just got this tremendous opportunity to express in a big way. And Wolverine, so it's been done two things for me. It's given me the chance to work with the biggest visual effects and some of the most talented people. I was lucky to have a leading man who is truly one of the nicest guys in the business.
So there wasn't any South African, Australian...
Sure, we just kicked their ass every time in cricket. I mean, that was so great. And now we lost the test this weekend. I'm sure you'll call me and say so.
Is he
we still won all the one days.
Is he into that?
Only to the extent that I am. I mean, both of us are not avid fans, but we enjoy sport and we like seeing. And I think there's something about him being from the Southern Hemisphere and me. We're fairly down-to-earth people.
Okay.
Very hard-working guy.
Okay. You won Men's Health Best Man Award some time ago.
They didn't have a lot of good choice.
How do you handle the combination of praise and then criticism?
I like the praise. How do you handle the combination? It's part of the turf. Believe it or not, criticism is inevitable in what we do. Sometimes it hurts like hell. Sometimes it's illuminating. If it's just something you have to handle. It's just something you do. It doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's fun. But sometimes they're right, and you got to say, "Wow, I didn't do that as well as I could have. Maybe I can do it better next time."
With it tend. Do you? The financial stress. Fox has a lot riding on this.
Yeah.
How did you sort of manage the pressure of working with someone else's money, that aspect?
Well, in a sense, I'm working with their money, and whether they know it or not, they're working with my money, in the sense that if this is a failure for me, I will not have an income in the future. So both of us have got a financial risk going on. People often say, "Oh, well, they've got the money." It's like, well, wait a minute. It's money to me too, in the sense that if it fails and I don't get to work, I can't pay for my kids to go to school either. So I don't think I worried about money so much as just trying to make a good film for everybody, for me, for them, for everybody, and that's a pressure. But you don't think money. You think I got to make a great film